The story of civilization itself begins not in grand palaces or mighty temples, but in the fertile mud between two ancient rivers. Where the Tigris and Euphrates flow through what is now Iraq, humanity took its first tentative steps, from wandering to settling, from surviving to thriving. In this land between the waters, the Sumerians called it the place where kingship descended from heaven. The Akkadians knew it as the center of the world. We call it Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Here in this river valley, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in human history, people discovered they could make the earth yield its treasures, not by following the herds or gathering wild plants, but by channeling water and planting seeds. What began as simple irrigation channels carved into riverbanks would give birth to cities, kingdoms, and empires that would echo through eternity. According to ancient texts, it was here that the gods first taught humans the arts of civilization. Enki, the wise water god, emerged from the Persian Gulf, bringing gifts of knowledge, teaching the first people how to build cities, brew beer, and write their thoughts in clay. The goddess Inanna descended into the underworld and returned, bringing the sacred powers of civilization, the me, that governed everything from kingship to craftsmanship. But beneath these divine tales lie traces of a more gradual truth, revealed by patient archaeologists sifting through ancient tells, the mounds that hide dead cities like layer cakes of human history. They found evidence of the Ubaid people, who first drained the marshes around 6,500 BCE, creating small farming villages where before only reeds and waterbirds dwelt. These pioneers knew nothing of writing or bronze, yet they laid foundations upon which the entire edifice of human civilization would rise. In the beginning, there was water, endless water. As the last ice age retreated, the Persian Gulf crept northward, flooding the low-lying plains between the great rivers. This annual flooding both blessed and cursed the land, depositing rich silt that made the soil incomparably fertile, but also requiring constant vigilance and cooperation to control. Unlike the predictable floods of Egypt's Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates were wild, unpredictable deities that could bring abundance one year and devastating destruction the next. This fundamental uncertainty shaped everything that followed in Mesopotamian civilization. The need to manage flooding led to the first organized communities. The need to store surplus grain led to the first accounting systems. The need to coordinate labor led to the first governments. And the need to appease the seemingly capricious gods led to the first temples reaching toward heaven. The earliest Mesopotamian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, tells of a time before time when neither heaven nor earth existed, only Apsu, the primordial freshwater ocean, and Tiamat, the salt sea, mingling their waters together. From their union came the first gods, young and boisterous deities whose noise disturbed their ancient parents. In the cosmic battle that followed, the young god Marduk slew Tiamat, splitting her body in two to create heaven and earth, mixing her blood with clay to create humanity as servants for the gods. This myth encoded deep truths about Mesopotamian life, the mixing of fresh and salt water that occurs where the rivers meet the Gulf, creating the rich deltaic soil, the violence of floods that could seem like primordial chaos returning, and the fundamental belief that humans existed to serve forces greater than themselves through endless toil. As you begin to relax and let these ancient stories wash over you, imagine those first settlers arriving at the edge of the marshlands, seeing endless possibilities in the reeds and waterways. They carried with them seeds saved from wild grasses, the ancestors of wheat and barley, knowledge of which plants could heal and which could harm, and most importantly, the wisdom that many hands working together could achieve what no individual could accomplish alone. These were not primitive people, but innovators facing challenges no humans had confronted before. How do you measure a field when the flooding changes landmarks every year? How do you ensure fair distribution when surplus allows some to accumulate more than others? How do you organize labor when projects require hundreds of workers? How do you remember agreements when human memory is fallible? The answers they developed to these questions would lay the groundwork for mathematics, law, government, and writing. In those early villages along the waterways, the Ubaid people developed a distinctive culture. We know them through their pottery, elegant vessels painted with geometric designs, through their figurines, strange elongated forms with coffee bean eyes that may represent their gods, or perhaps themselves adorned for ritual through their architecture. The first temples were simply houses set aside for the gods, gradually elevated on platforms to keep them safe from floods. These platforms would grow generation by generation, eventually becoming the massive ziggurats that dominated Mesopotamian skylines for millennia. The Ubaid period, lasting from about 6,500 to 3,800 BCE, saw the slow transformation of the Mesopotamian landscape. Where once there had been only marshes and seasonal camps, permanent villages appeared. The earliest of these settlements, places like Tel el-Wali and Haji Muhammad, were modest affairs, clusters of mud brick houses surrounding central courtyards where families gathered to work and socialize. Yet within these humble beginnings lay the seeds of urban revolution. The Ubaid people developed new technologies that would prove essential for civilization. They perfected irrigation techniques, learning to build canals and levees that could control the river's fury. They domesticated animals beyond the sheep and goats of their ancestors, adding cattle that could pull plows through the heavy alluvial soil. They developed the potter's wheel, allowing mass production of standardized vessels for storage and trade. Most significantly, they created the first complex societies based on occupational specialization. No longer did every family need to produce its own food, tools, and shelter. Instead, some became full-time potters, others canal diggers, still others priests who maintained the rhythms of ritual that kept cosmic order. This specialization, made possible by agricultural surplus, freed human creativity to explore new realms of thought and expression. The religion of the Ubaid people centered on forces of nature personified as deities. An, the Sky Father, ruled from the heavens. Ki, or Ninhursag, the Earth Mother, brought forth life from the soil. Enki, Lord of the sweet waters beneath the earth, provided the irrigation that made agriculture possible. These gods were not distant abstractions, but immediate presences requiring constant attention through offerings, rituals, and the maintenance of their earthly houses. As night deepens around you, let your mind wander through these ancient settlements as evening fell thousands of years ago. Oil lamps flickered in doorways as families gathered for their evening meal of barley porridge flavored with herbs, fish from the rivers, and perhaps dates from palm groves. Children played with clay toys, while adults discussed the next day's work, which canals needed cleaning, when to begin the harvest, how to allocate labor for temple construction. The social organization of Ubaid communities remains somewhat mysterious to us, revealed only through archaeological evidence. Houses were relatively uniform in size, suggesting a fairly egalitarian society, though some contained more elaborate goods than others. The presence of stamp seals used to mark property and authorize transactions indicates the beginning of private ownership and the need for administrative control. Perhaps most intriguingly, the Ubaid culture spread far beyond southern Mesopotamia. Ubaid-style pottery and architecture appeared along the Persian Gulf coast, in northern Mesopotamia, and even in parts of Syria and Iran. This was not spread by conquest. There is no evidence of warfare or fortifications from this period, but through peaceful expansion and cultural influence. The Ubaid people had created something so successful, so attractive, that others voluntarily adopted their way of life. This peaceful expansion would not last. As settlements grew larger and resources became more valuable, competition intensified. The stage was set for the next phase of Mesopotamian history, when the first true cities would rise from the plains, when writing would be invented to track their wealth, and when kings would emerge to lead them in war and peace. But for now, in the gentle twilight of the Ubaid period, humanity was learning the basic skills of civilization in the patient rhythm of agricultural life. As you sink toward sleep, let the ancient waters carry you deeper into the past, to that time when all was potential, when the first farmers looked out over fields they had claimed from the marsh and dreamed of permanence, prosperity, and peace. Little did they know their descendants would build cities that touched the sky, create laws that governed millions, and tell stories that would outlast the rivers themselves. As centuries flowed like the eternal rivers, the scattered villages of the Ubaid period gradually gave way to something new and extraordinary. The world's first cities began to emerge from the fertile floodplains around 4000 BCE, marking the start of what archaeologists call the Uruk period, named after the magnificent city that would dominate southern Mesopotamia for 1,000 years. Picture, if you will, the transformation of these early settlements. Mud brick houses clustered ever more tightly together, paths becoming streets, gardens becoming communal fields, and at the center of each growing community, a temple complex that served not just as a house of worship, but as the economic and administrative heart of urban life. These temples owned vast tracts of land, employed thousands of workers, and collected offerings that they redistributed to support specialists, craftsmen, priests, scribes, and administrators who no longer needed to farm for their daily bread. The city of Eridu held special significance in Mesopotamian memory as the first city where kingship descended from heaven before the Great Flood. Archaeological evidence suggests it may indeed be one of the oldest urban centers, dating back to 5400 BCE, beginning as a small shrine that grew over millennia into a massive temple complex dedicated to Enki, god of wisdom and fresh water. Each generation built upon the ruins of the last, creating a sacred mound that rose from the surrounding plain like an artificial mountain. In these early cities, a revolution in human organization was taking place. Large numbers of people who were not blood relatives learned to live together in close proximity. This required new forms of social organization, new ways of resolving disputes, and new methods of coordinating collective action. The temple emerged as the natural center of this coordination, its priests serving as managers, administrators, and intermediaries between the human and divine worlds. The growth of cities accelerated during the Uruk period as populations swelled through natural increase and immigration from surrounding regions. Uruk itself grew to cover 250 hectares, housing perhaps 40,000 people, making it the largest human settlement the world had ever seen. Its influence spread throughout Mesopotamia and beyond, as Uruk colonies appeared along trade routes, carrying with them a distinctive culture, material goods, and most importantly, new ideas about urban organization. It was in Uruk that another revolution began, one that would transform human consciousness forever. The invention of writing began prosaically enough as a solution to an administrative problem. As temple holdings grew more complex and trade networks expanded, human memory proved inadequate to track the movement of goods, the obligations of workers, and the intricate web of debts and credits that held the urban economy together. The first writing consisted of simple tokens, clay shapes representing different commodities, a cone for grain, a sphere for a sheep, pressed into wet clay tablets to record transactions. Gradually, These tokens evolved into impressed symbols, then into inscribed pictographs that could represent not just objects but actions, and eventually abstract concepts. By 3200 BCE, a full writing system had emerged, capable of recording not just economic transactions but laws, prayers, stories, and the full range of human thought. As you drift deeper into relaxation, imagine those first scribes in the temple courtyards, learning to press their reed styluses into soft clay tablets. Feel the satisfaction of capturing fleeting words in permanent form, the power of sending messages across space and time. Writing transformed human society in ways its inventors could never have imagined. It allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations, enabled the administration of large territories, and created a new class of literate elites who would shape Mesopotamian civilization for millennia. Alongside writing, other innovations emerged from these early cities. The potter's wheel appeared around 3500 BCE, revolutionizing ceramic production. Bronze metallurgy developed as smiths learned to alloy copper with tin, creating tools and weapons far superior to stone. The wheel transformed transport, though in muddy Mesopotamia, boats remained the primary means of moving bulk goods. Monumental architecture emerged as cities competed to build the most impressive temples. Yet perhaps the most significant innovation was invisible. The idea of the city itself as a new form of human community. Urbanization created new possibilities and new problems. Wealth could accumulate, but so could poverty. Specialization allowed excellence, but also dependence on others. Laws could create order, but also oppression. Cities were humanity's first great experiment in living beyond the scale of kinship, and their successes and failures would shape all future civilizations. The Uruk period also saw the emergence of social stratification on an unprecedented scale. While village societies had leaders and followers, rich and poor, cities created gulfs between social classes that had never existed before. At the top were the priests, and eventually kings who controlled the temples and their vast wealth. Below them, administrators and merchants managed the complex urban economy. Skilled craftsmen produced luxury goods and tools. Common laborers worked the fields and built the monuments. At the bottom, slaves, often war captives or debtors, had lost their freedom. This hierarchy was justified by religious ideology. The gods had created humans to serve them, and just as the gods had their king, Enlil or later Marduk, so human society needed kings to maintain order and ensure the gods received their due. The Lugal, or big man, who emerged as war leader during conflicts, gradually transformed into a permanent institution of kingship, claiming divine sanction for rule. The urban revolution created new forms of cultural expression. Cylinder seals carved with intricate scenes became both practical tools for authorizing documents and miniature works of art. Sculpture evolved from simple votive figures to complex representations of gods, rulers, and mythological scenes. Architecture grew ever more ambitious, with temples reaching toward heaven on massive platforms that would eventually become true ziggurats. Trade networks expanded dramatically during this period. Uruk merchants traveled far beyond Mesopotamia, establishing trading posts in Iran, Syria, and Anatolia. They sought metals absent from the alluvial plain, copper from Oman, tin from Afghanistan, silver from Anatolia. They traded textiles, famous throughout the ancient world for their quality, and agricultural surplus for timber from Lebanon, stone from the mountains, and luxury goods from distant lands. This trade required new forms of economic organization. Partnerships formed to finance long-distance expeditions. Credit instruments developed to facilitate transactions across time and space. Standardized weights and measures emerged to ensure fair exchange. The temple institutions often backed these ventures, using their vast resources to finance trade that brought both necessities and luxuries to Mesopotamian cities. As you continue your journey towards sleep, envision the bustling streets of ancient Uruk at dawn. Merchants prepare their caravans for distant journeys, while farmers bring produce to market. Craftsmen open their workshops, the sound of hammer on metal ringing through the air. Priests climb the temple stairs to perform morning rituals. Scribes take their positions to record the day's transactions. Children run through the streets on their way to lessons, for education too was being formalized in these first cities. The Uruk period established patterns that would endure throughout Mesopotamian history. The tension between temple and palace, between religious and secular authority, began here. The role of cities as centers of innovation and culture was established. The importance of writing and education in maintaining complex societies became apparent. Most importantly, the idea that humans could create large-scale societies based on law, administration, and shared culture, rather than kinship alone, was proven viable. Yet success brought its own challenges. As cities grew wealthy, they became tempting targets for raiders. As they expanded their territories, they came into conflict with neighboring settlements. As social hierarchies solidified, tensions between classes increased. The relatively peaceful Uruk period was drawing to a close, setting the stage for an age of city-states, warfare, and the emergence of history's first empires. But that transformation lay in the future. For now, let your mind rest in this moment of urban dawn, when all seemed possible in the shadow of the first ziggurats. The relative peace and prosperity of the early urban period could not last forever. As cities grew wealthy and populous, they became tempting targets for raiders from the mountains and deserts that surrounded the river valley. Moreover, the cities themselves began to compete more intensely for limited resources: water, land, and trade routes. What had begun as peaceful competition through temple building and religious festivals gradually escalated into armed conflict. Around 2900 BCE, southern Mesopotamia entered what historians call the early dynastic period, characterized by endemic warfare between city-states. The land of Sumer, as it came to be known, fragmented into dozens of independent cities, each ruled by its own king, each claiming the patronage of its own city god, and each striving for dominance over its neighbors. This period of conflict would paradoxically lead to some of ancient Mesopotamia's greatest cultural achievements, as competition spurred innovation in military technology, administrative efficiency, and artistic expression. The catalyst for this transformation was the increasing scarcity of water and land. As populations grew and irrigation systems expanded, upstream cities could divert water from their downstream neighbors, while cities near the marshes could block drainage, causing fields to become waterlogged and salinated. Conflicts that might once have been resolved through negotiation or ritual combat now escalated into wars of conquest, as cities sought to control entire irrigation networks. In this age of conflict, new forms of political and military organization emerged. The old system of temple administration proved inadequate for sustained warfare, leading to the rise of secular palace complexes alongside religious ones. Kings who had originally been temporary war leaders, elected during emergencies, now established dynastic rule, passing power to their sons and creating royal ideologies to justify their permanent authority. The city of Kish held particular prestige during this period, as Sumerian tradition maintained that kingship had first descended there after the Great Flood. To be Lugal of Kish became a title claimed by kings who aspired to rule over all of Sumer, though few achieved more than temporary dominance. The title carried such weight that rulers would claim it generations after Kish itself had declined into insignificance. Military technology evolved rapidly during the early dynastic period. The Sumerian phalanx, ranks of spearmen protected by rectangular shields and copper helmets, became the dominant tactical formation. Armies grew from small retinues of professional soldiers to large levies that could number in the thousands. Chariots appeared on the battlefield, though these early vehicles were slow and cumbersome, pulled by donkeys rather than horses. They served more as mobile command platforms than shock weapons. The Standard of Ur, one of the most famous artifacts from this period, depicts both faces of early dynastic society. One side shows the king at war, leading his troops and trampling enemies beneath his chariot wheels. The other shows him at peace, presiding over a banquet, while servants bring tribute and offerings. This duality of war and peace, destruction and creation, would characterize Mesopotamian kingship throughout its history. Among the many kings of this era, one stands out in popular memory, though perhaps more for legend than historical achievement. Gilgamesh of Uruk, who ruled around 2700 BCE, became the subject of humanity's first great literary epic. Later versions of his story would transform him from a historical king into a mythical hero, two-thirds divine, who sought and failed to find immortality. The Epic of Gilgamesh, with its themes of friendship, mortality, and the limits of human ambition, would resonate through the ages, influencing literature from the Bible to modern novels. Yet the real Gilgamesh, like his contemporaries, was primarily concerned with more immediate matters, defending his city's walls, securing its water supply, and extracting tribute from weaker neighbors. The Great Walls of Uruk, which legend credited to Gilgamesh, were indeed an impressive achievement, stretching nearly 10 kilometers and encompassing an area large enough to shelter the entire population during sieges. As you let these stories of ancient conflicts wash over you, drifting deeper into relaxation, consider how these first experiments in statecraft established patterns that would persist throughout history. The tension between religious and secular authority, the use of warfare to resolve resource conflicts, the development of military technology and tactics, the creation of royal ideologies to justify power, all these began in the muddy plains between the rivers. The early dynastic period also saw important social and economic changes. The constant warfare created a steady supply of slaves from captured enemies who were put to work on massive building projects, irrigation systems, and agricultural estates. Private property and land became more common, as kings rewarded their followers with confiscated fields. Merchants gained prominence as military campaigns opened new trade routes and created demand for weapons, metals, and luxury goods to display royal power. Writing evolved during this period, from a purely administrative tool to a medium for literature, law, and propaganda. Royal inscriptions proclaimed the king's victories and piety. Votive offerings recorded the names of donors, ensuring their memory would endure. Legal documents recorded sales, contracts, marriages, and adoptions, creating a paper trail that allows us to glimpse daily life in these ancient cities. The city of Ur emerged as a major power during the later early dynastic period. Its royal cemetery, excavated in the 1920s, revealed the incredible wealth and sophisticated craftsmanship of this era. Golden lyres, elaborate headdresses, weapons of precious metals, and most disturbingly, evidence of human sacrifice, as entire retinues followed their rulers into death. This practice, apparently unique to this period and place, speaks to the enormous power kings had accumulated and the religious beliefs that supported such extreme expressions of loyalty. The royal tombs of Ur contained not just precious objects, but insights into Sumerian beliefs about the afterlife. The dead were equipped with everything they might need in the next world: food and drink, weapons and tools, servants and entertainers. Queen Puabi's tomb contained the bodies of more than 20 attendants, apparently poisoned to accompany her in death, dressed in their finest clothes, and arranged as if for a banquet. This period also saw the development of new artistic styles. The votive statues from Tel Asmar, with their enormous eyes and clasped hands, represent worshippers in eternal prayer before their gods. Relief sculptures depicted military victories, religious ceremonies, and mythological scenes, with increasing naturalism and narrative complexity. Metalworkers achieved new heights of skill, creating objects of breathtaking beauty from precious materials. The fragmentation of the early dynastic period served an important function in Mesopotamian cultural development. Each city-state, striving to outdo its rivals, became a center of innovation. Lagash developed new irrigation techniques. Ur pioneered architectural innovations. Uruk remained a center of learning and literature. This competitive diversity fostered creativity that might have been stifled under a unified empire. Yet the costs of constant warfare were enormous. Fields lay fallow as farmers were conscripted. Trade routes became dangerous. Resources that could have improved daily life were consumed in military expenditures. The social fabric frayed as traditional communities were disrupted by war, slavery, and forced relocations. Many began to dream of a strong ruler who could unite the land and bring peace. As you sink deeper towards sleep, let your mind wander through this age of heroes and conflicts, when the foundations of kingship, law, and statecraft were being laid through trial and error, victory and defeat. The early dynastic period was humanity's first experiment with competitive city-states, and while it ended in exhaustion and conquest, it established cultural patterns and innovations that would endure for millennia. In the darkness of your approaching dreams, perhaps you can hear the distant clash of bronze weapons, the chanting of priests, the scratching of scribal styluses on clay, all the sounds of a civilization learning through conflict what it meant to be human in an urban world. As the early dynastic period progressed, the constant warfare between city-states began to take its toll on Sumerian society. Fields lay fallow as farmers were conscripted into armies. Irrigation systems fell into disrepair without sufficient labor for maintenance. Trade routes became dangerous as raiders and deserters plagued the countryside. The very success of Sumerian civilization in creating wealth and complex societies had generated conflicts that threatened to tear it apart. It was in this context of crisis that new ideas about political unity began to emerge. If the gods had intended humans to live in separate warring cities, why did they allow such chaos and destruction? Perhaps the divine plan called for a single ruler to unite the land under one law, one administration, one peace. This ideology of universal kingship would become a recurring theme in Mesopotamian history, as ambitious rulers sought to transcend the limitations of city-state politics. The first to achieve lasting success in this endeavor came not from the Sumerian heartland, but from the north. Sargon of Akkad, whose very name means legitimate king, suggesting humble origins that required such protestations, emerged around 2334 BCE to create the world's first multi-ethnic empire. According to later legends, Sargon had been born in secret to a priestess, cast adrift in a reed basket on the river, and raised by a gardener before rising through palace service to seize power. Whatever his true origins, Sargon proved a military and administrative genius who transformed Mesopotamian politics. His Akkadian-speaking soldiers, perhaps more mobile and less bound by traditional tactical doctrines than their Sumerian counterparts, swept through the land, conquering city after city. But unlike previous conquerors who had been content to extract tribute and withdraw, Sargon established permanent Akkadian rule, placing his sons and daughters in key positions and creating a centralized bureaucracy. The Akkadian Empire at its height stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, from the Zagros Mountains to the Arabian Desert. For the first time in history, A single political authority controlled the entire Mesopotamian alluvial plain and the crucial trade routes that connected it to the wider world. Sargon boasted that ships from Meluhha, probably the Indus Valley, Magan, likely Oman, and Dilmun, modern Bahrain, docked at Akkad's wharves, bringing exotic goods from across the known world. Yet this unprecedented unity came at a cost. Sumerian culture and language, though not suppressed, were subordinated to Akkadian ways. Local temples lost autonomy as the central government claimed a share of their revenues. Proud city-states that had maintained independence for centuries found themselves reduced to provincial capitals. The delicate balance between religious and secular authority that had evolved over millennia was disrupted by kings who claimed divine support for universal rule. Sargon's daughter, Enheduanna, became history's first named author, composing hymns that brilliantly synthesized Sumerian religious traditions with Akkadian political ideology. As high priestess of the moon god at she wielded both spiritual and temporal authority, helping to legitimize her father's revolutionary regime. Her passionate poetry praising Inanna as the supreme goddess who granted kingship to her father established literary conventions that would influence religious writing for centuries. The empire faced constant challenges from rebellious cities that yearned for their lost independence, from mountain peoples who raided the prosperous plains, and from the inherent difficulties of governing diverse populations across vast distances without modern communications or transport. Each succession crisis brought renewed revolts as local rulers tested the strength of the new king. Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, who ruled around 2254 BCE, pushed Akkadian power to its zenith and perhaps contributed to its downfall through hubris. His military campaigns reached even further than his grandfather's, extending Akkadian influence into Anatolia and the Iranian plateau. His victory stele shows him climbing a mountain beneath protective stars, literally elevating himself toward divine status, while his enemies fall before him. In a radical break with tradition, Naram-Sin declared himself a god in his own lifetime, taking the title King of the Four Quarters, King of the Universe, and placing the divine determinative before his name in inscriptions. This deification of living rulers would become a recurring, if controversial, practice in Mesopotamian history, but at the time it shocked religious sensibilities and may have contributed to later legends about divine punishment for his presumption. Internal pressures combined with external threats to weaken the Akkadian state. Bureaucratic corruption drained resources as officials enriched themselves at imperial expense. Agricultural productivity declined in the south as salinization and poor maintenance degraded the irrigation systems. Provincial governors began acting as independent rulers, paying only nominal allegiance to Akkad. Mountain peoples, particularly the Gutians from the Zagros, pressed ever harder against the empire's borders. As you continue drifting into deeper relaxation, imagine the magnitude of these changes that swept across ancient Mesopotamia in just a few generations. What had been a patchwork of independent cities became a unified empire. What had been local conflicts became international wars. What had been human kings became divine rulers. These transformations created new possibilities for human organization and achievement, but also new forms of oppression and conflict. The Akkadian period saw significant cultural and technological developments. Bronze working techniques improved dramatically, allowing for more sophisticated weapons and tools. Artistic styles became more naturalistic and dynamic as court workshops attracted the best craftsmen from across the empire. The Akkadian language, written in cuneiform borrowed from Sumerian, became the diplomatic tongue of the ancient Near East, a status it would maintain for over 2,000 years. Administrative innovations during this period included the standardization of weights and measures across the empire, the creation of a unified calendar system, and the development of more sophisticated accounting methods to track imperial revenues. Cylinder seals, carved with intricate scenes and inscriptions, became markers of authority and identity as officials used them to authorize documents and mark property. The Akkadian Empire also witnessed important social changes. The mixing of Sumerian and Akkadian populations created a more cosmopolitan culture. Intermarriage between linguistic groups became common. Religious syncretism merged Sumerian and Akkadian deities, creating new mythologies that would endure for millennia. The empire's vast scale encouraged the movement of people, ideas, and goods on an unprecedented level. Trade flourished under imperial protection. Akkadian merchants ventured further than ever before, establishing contacts with the Harappan civilization of the Indus Valley, the early kingdoms of Anatolia, and the city-states of the Levant. They exported textiles, manufactured goods, and agricultural surplus in exchange for metals, precious stones, timber, and exotic products. This trade brought not just material wealth, but new technologies and ideas that enriched Mesopotamian culture. Yet for all its achievements, the Akkadian Empire carried within itself the seeds of its own destruction. The very diversity that made it strong also made it unstable. The military might that maintained order also drained resources. The divine kingship that justified universal rule also alienated traditional elites. The centralization that enabled efficient administration also created single points of failure when weak rulers or external pressures stressed the system. The fall of the Akkadian Empire around 2154 BCE was as dramatic as its rise. Climate change may have played a role. As evidence suggests, a severe drought affected the region. The Gutians, long a threat on the borders, finally broke through, sacking Akkad and other major cities. Provincial governors declared independence. The elaborate administrative apparatus collapsed. Within a generation, the world's first empire had fragmented back into competing city-states. Yet the idea of empire, once conceived, could not be forgotten. Future Mesopotamian rulers would look back to Sargon and Naram-Sin as models, seeking to recreate their universal dominion. The concept that diverse peoples could be united under a single government, that local traditions could be preserved within a larger political framework, that civilization could be organized on a scale beyond the individual city-state. These lessons of the Akkadian experience would inspire conquerors for millennia to come. As sleep approaches, let these images of rise and fall, unity and division, wash through your consciousness like the eternal rivers. The Akkadian Empire's brief existence changed the course of human history, demonstrating both the potential and the perils of large-scale political organization. In your dreams tonight, perhaps you will walk the streets of long-lost Akkad, hearing the babble of different languages in its markets, seeing the tribute of distant lands in its storehouses, feeling the pride and anxiety of living at the center of the known world, in humanity's first attempt to unite diverse peoples under a single vision of order and power. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire around 2154 BCE ushered in a period of fragmentation and foreign domination that would test the resilience of Mesopotamian civilization. The Gutians, described by Sumerian sources as barbarous raiders from the Zagros Mountains, descended upon the leaderless land like a plague of locusts. For nearly a century, these mountain peoples controlled much of northern Mesopotamia, while the south reverted to independent city-states, struggling to maintain order and prosperity. Yet from this dark period emerged a remarkable renaissance, as the city of Lagash under its Ensi, or governor Gudea, achieved a golden age of peace and prosperity. While nominally acknowledging Gutian overlordship, Gudea focused on internal development, commissioning massive building projects, promoting trade, and cultivating a reputation for piety and justice that would make him one of the most celebrated rulers in Mesopotamian memory. Gudayar's numerous statue inscriptions provide our most detailed look at Sumerian royal ideology and religious practice. He claimed to rule not through military might, but through divine favor, maintaining peace through diplomacy and wealth rather than conquest. His building hymns describe in loving detail the construction of temples, the importation of exotic materials from distant lands, and the ceremonies that consecrated sacred spaces to the gods. The expulsion of the Gutians by Utu-Hegal of Uruk around 2050 BCE opened the way for the last great flowering of Sumerian civilization. The third dynasty of Ur, known as Ur-Thrud, established by Ur-Nammu in 2112 BCE, created an empire that, while smaller than Sargon's, achieved an unprecedented level of administrative control and bureaucratic sophistication that would never be equaled in ancient Mesopotamia. Ur-Nammu immortalized himself not through military conquest, but through law. His law code, predating the more famous code of Hammurabi by 3 centuries, established the principle that justice should be consistent, predictable, and publicly known rather than arbitrary royal decree. The code addressed everything from murder and theft to divorce and agricultural disputes, establishing standard penalties and procedures that protected the weak from the strong. The administrative apparatus of Ur III was breathtakingly complex. Tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets document every aspect of economic life, from the rations given to individual workers to the movements of vast herds of livestock. Provinces were reorganized into uniform districts, each required to provide specific contributions to the central government. Workshops produced standardized goods for redistribution. Armies of scribes recorded every transaction in exhaustive detail. This bureaucratic efficiency came at a human cost. The Bela system of rotating provincial obligations placed heavy burdens on local populations. Workers were organized into rigid categories with fixed rations and responsibilities. The entire economy functioned more like a vast estate managed for royal benefit than a free market. The very completeness of documentation that makes Ur-Thrud a historian's paradise suggests a society where every aspect of life was regulated and recorded. Under Shulgi, son of Ur-Nammu, who ruled for an astonishing 48 years, the empire reached its zenith. Shulgi reformed the scribal schools, standardized religious practices across the realm, and, like Naram-Sin before him, declared himself divine. His hymns portray him as a Renaissance king, equally skilled in war and peace, literate in both Sumerian and Akkadian, able to play musical instruments and run incredible distances. Yet beneath this glittering facade, structural problems accumulated. The agricultural base of southern Mesopotamia continued to deteriorate as millennia of irrigation without adequate drainage increased soil salinity. The bureaucracy consumed ever more resources in its quest for total documentation and control. The military faced increasing pressure from Amorite nomads infiltrating from the west and Elamites threatening from the east. The end came swiftly around 2004 BCE. A combination of Elamite invasion, Amorite pressure, and internal economic collapse brought down the Ur-III state. The last king, Ibisin, watched helplessly as provinces declared independence. Enemy forces approached the capital, and famine stalked the land. His desperate letters to provincial governors, pleading for grain shipments and military support, document the disintegration of central authority. As you sink deeper into restful contemplation, consider how this cycle of unity and fragmentation repeated throughout Mesopotamian history. Each empire learned from its predecessors, adopting their administrative techniques, their royal ideologies, their artistic styles. Yet each also fell victim to similar pressures. the difficulty of maintaining unity across diverse populations, the tension between centralization and local autonomy, the challenge of balancing military needs with economic productivity. The fall of Ur-3 marked the end of Sumerian political independence, but not of Sumerian culture. For centuries to come, scribes would learn Sumerian as a classical language, priests would perform rituals in Sumerian, and literary works would preserve Sumerian wisdom, even as Akkadian and later Aramaic became the languages of daily life. The Sumerians achieved a different kind of immortality through their cultural contributions. During these centuries of expansion and challenge, Mesopotamian influence spread far beyond the river valleys. Sumerian and Akkadian merchants established trading colonies in Anatolia, bringing writing and administrative techniques to new populations. Diplomatic correspondence connected Mesopotamian rulers with counterparts in Egypt, Syria, and Iran, creating an international system of elite exchange and shared culture. The period following Ur-3's collapse saw new peoples entering Mesopotamia and establishing their own kingdoms. The Amorites, West Semitic speakers, who had long lived on the margins of urban civilization as herders and mercenaries, seized power in many cities. They brought new energy and perspectives, adapting Mesopotamian traditions while maintaining their own tribal customs and social structures. In the city of Isin, Ishbi-Era, one of Ibisin's former generals, established a dynasty that claimed to be the legitimate successor to Ur-3. The kings of Isin continued many Ur-3 practices, maintaining the cult centers, copying Sumerian literature, and even creating royal hymns in the old style. But they lacked the resources and control of their predecessors, ruling over a much reduced territory. Simultaneously, the city of Larsa, under its energetic Amorite rulers, emerged as a rival power. The competition between Isin and Larsa, lasting nearly 2 centuries, saw constant warfare but also cultural flourishing. Both cities patronized learning, commissioned literary works, and maintained the ancient temples. This period saw the creation of important Sumerian literary texts, including new versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Further north, the old Assyrian city of Ashur was developing its own unique trajectory. Assyrian merchants had long dominated trade routes to Anatolia, establishing a network of commercial colonies, or karums, in cities like Kultepe. These merchants operated with remarkable independence, creating sophisticated financial instruments, maintaining regular communications through letter writing, and spreading cuneiform literacy far beyond Mesopotamia. The old Assyrian trade network represents one of history's first multinational commercial enterprises. Merchants formed partnerships, extended credit, and managed risk through diversification. They dealt primarily in textiles, which they exported from Assyria, and metals, particularly tin and silver, which they imported from various sources. Their detailed business correspondence provides insights into commercial practices that would remain standard for millennia. Technological innovations continued despite political fragmentation. The true arch appeared in architecture, allowing for stronger and more flexible construction. Glass-making techniques improved, producing colorful beads and vessels. Mathematics advanced, as scribes developed more sophisticated methods for solving practical problems. Medical texts began to distinguish more clearly between magical and empirical treatments. As you drift closer to sleep, let your mind wander through this age of transformation, when the certainties of the Sumerian world gave way to a more complex, diverse Mesopotamian civilization. New peoples brought new ideas, yet they built upon ancient foundations. The cities that had stood for millennia continued to thrive under new management. The gods received worship in different languages, but in the same temples. The rivers flowed as they always had, indifferent to the human dramas on their banks, yet sustaining all life in the land between the waters. This period of expansion and challenge prepared Mesopotamia for its next great phase, when Babylon would rise from obscurity to create an empire that would define the region's future. But that story awaits in your dreams. For now, rest in the knowledge that civilization's resilience had been tested and proven, that cultures could merge and transform without losing their essential wisdom, that the human experiment in urban life would continue despite all challenges, carried forward by the eternal rivers toward an unknown but hopeful future. After the collapse of Ur III, Mesopotamia entered a new phase of political fragmentation and cultural synthesis. As Amorite dynasties established themselves in various cities, these Western Semitic speakers, who had been gradually infiltrating Mesopotamia for centuries, working as mercenaries, herders, and laborers, seized political power. They brought new energy to ancient cities, adapting Mesopotamian traditions while adding their own customs and perspectives. Among these Amorite kingdoms, one would rise to unprecedented heights. Babylon, a relatively minor city during the Sumerian period, emerged as the dominant power under its sixth king, Hammurabi, who ruled from 1792 to 1750 BCE. Through a combination of patient diplomacy, military skill, and administrative genius, Hammurabi transformed Babylon from a modest city-state into the capital of an empire that would define Mesopotamian civilization for the remainder of its history. Hammurabi's famous law code, carved on stone stele and displayed publicly, represents both continuity with Sumerian legal traditions and innovation in scope and sophistication. Containing 282 laws covering everything from property rights to family relations, from commercial transactions to criminal justice, the code reveals a complex urban society with clearly defined social classes, extensive commercial networks, and sophisticated legal procedures. What made Hammurabi's code revolutionary was not its individual provisions, many of which echoed earlier Sumerian laws, but its comprehensive nature and public accessibility. By inscribing the laws in stone and placing them where literate citizens could read them, Hammurabi established the principle that justice should be transparent and consistent, not dependent on royal whim or priestly interpretation. Though harsh by modern standards, the code's emphasis on proportional punishment and evidence-based judgment represented a major advance in legal thinking. The prologue and epilogue of the code reveal Hammurabi's royal ideology, presenting himself as the shepherd chosen by the gods to bring justice to the land. He claims to have made Babylon's patron deity, Marduk, supreme among the gods, reflecting the city's new political dominance. This elevation of Marduk from local deity to king of heaven would have profound religious consequences, as Babylonian theology gradually syncretized the diverse Mesopotamian pantheon under Marduk's authority. Babylon under Hammurabi became a true cosmopolitan center, attracting scholars, merchants, and craftsmen from across the known world. The city's ziggurat, Etemenanki, the foundation of heaven and earth, rose over 90 meters high, visible from miles away, and inspiring later biblical stories of the Tower of Babel. Temples, palaces, and residential districts spread along both banks of the Euphrates, connected by bridges and ferries, creating an urban landscape of unprecedented scale and grandeur. The Old Babylonian period, as historians term this era, witnessed a flowering of literature, mathematics, and science. Scribal schools produced new editions of classic Sumerian texts while creating original works in Akkadian. The Epic of Gilgamesh received its classic formulation, weaving together disparate Sumerian tales into a unified narrative exploring themes of mortality, friendship, and the human condition that still resonate today. Mathematical texts from this period show remarkable sophistication. Babylonian mathematicians used a sexagesimal system based on 60 that we still employ for measuring time and angles. They could solve quadratic equations, calculate compound interest, and determine the areas of complex geometric figures. Astronomical observations allowed them to predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and create accurate calendars combining lunar and solar cycles. As you drift ever deeper into peaceful slumber, imagine walking through the streets of Hammurabi's Babylon, the bustle of the commercial district where merchants haggle over goods from distant lands, the quiet courtyards of scribal schools where young students practice their cuneiform on practice tablets, the massive temples where priests perform daily rituals to maintain cosmic order, the royal palace where the king dispenses justice and receives ambassadors from foreign courts. Yet, even at its height, Babylon faced challenges that would eventually undermine its power. The integration of diverse populations, Sumerians, Akkadians, Amorites, Kassites, Hurrians, and others, created social tensions. The wealth generated by trade and agriculture attracted raiders and conquerors. The very success of Babylonian culture in spreading throughout the Near East created rival centers of power that would challenge Babylon's supremacy. To the north, Assyria, originally a modest trading city on the upper Tigris, began its rise to power. Taking advantage of Babylon's occasional weakness and the constant threats from mountain peoples, Assyrian merchants had long dominated the lucrative trade routes to Anatolia, and their wealth funded military expansion that would eventually make them the most feared warriors in the ancient world. The Kassites, a mysterious people from the Zagros Mountains, conquered Babylon around 1595 BCE, establishing a dynasty that would rule for over 4 centuries, the longest in Mesopotamian history. Though often dismissed as a dark age, the Kassite period actually saw considerable cultural continuity and innovation, including the development of a sophisticated system of land grants that created a new provincial aristocracy. During the Late Bronze Age, roughly 1500 to 1200 BCE, Mesopotamia became part of an international system that connected Egypt, Anatolia, the Aegean, and the Levant in networks of diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence from this period, reveal kings addressing each other as brothers, exchanging gifts, negotiating marriages, and managing conflicts through embassies rather than warfare. This cosmopolitan era saw the spread of cuneiform writing and Mesopotamian cultural influences throughout the Near East. Akkadian became the diplomatic language used in correspondence between Egyptian pharaohs and Levantine princes. Babylonian literature was copied and adapted in peripheral regions. Mesopotamian gods were worshipped far from their original homes. The period also witnessed technological and cultural innovations. Horse-drawn chariots transformed warfare and transportation. Iron-working technology, though not originating in Mesopotamia, was adapted and improved by Mesopotamian smiths. New architectural techniques allowed for larger and more complex buildings. Artistic styles showed increasing naturalism and sophistication. Medicine advanced significantly during this golden age. Babylonian physicians developed diagnostic procedures, surgical techniques, and pharmaceutical preparations that would influence medical practice throughout the ancient world. They created detailed catalogues of symptoms and treatments, distinguishing between conditions that could be treated empirically and those requiring spiritual intervention. Literature flourished with new genres and themes. Wisdom literature offered practical advice for daily life. Religious hymns explored theological questions with increasing sophistication. Historical chronicles began to record events with greater accuracy and detail. Personal letters reveal the concerns and aspirations of ordinary people, from merchants worried about their caravans to parents arranging marriages for their children. As your consciousness fades toward dreams, consider how this golden age represented both culmination and transformation. Everything that made Mesopotamian civilization distinctive, its urban life, its technological innovation, its cultural achievements, reached new heights. Yet the very success of Mesopotamian culture in spreading beyond its homeland would ultimately contribute to its transformation as new peoples and ideas entered the ancient land between the rivers. The international system of the Late Bronze Age would collapse dramatically around 1200 BCE, ushering in a period of upheaval and transformation. But for now, in this moment of civilizational peak, let your mind rest in the magnificence of ancient Babylon, where Hammurabi's laws brought order, where scholars pushed the boundaries of human knowledge, where merchants connected distant lands, and where the ziggurat of Marduk reached toward heaven, proclaiming humanity's aspiration to touch the divine through the works of their own hands. In your approaching dreams, perhaps you will climb those ancient stairs, feeling the cool evening breeze off the Euphrates, seeing the city spread below in the twilight, hearing the evening prayers rise from 1,000 households, knowing that you stand at the center of the known world, at the peak of humanity's first great urban civilization, in the golden moment before the inevitable changes that time brings to all human endeavors. The collapse of the Late Bronze Age international system around 1200 BCE sent shockwaves through Mesopotamia as throughout the ancient Near East. The mysterious sea peoples who devastated the eastern Mediterranean did not directly attack Mesopotamia, but the disruption of trade routes, economic networks, and political alliances created cascading crises that would test the resilience of Mesopotamian civilization. In this time of troubles, Assyria emerged as the dominant military power of the Near East, transforming from a commercial city-state into a militaristic empire that would eventually control territories from Egypt to Iran. The Middle Assyrian period saw innovations in military technology and tactics that would make Assyrian armies the most effective fighting forces of their time. Iron weapons gradually replaced bronze, providing Assyrian soldiers with superior arms. Cavalry units supplemented and eventually replaced charioteer elites. Siege warfare techniques, including battering rams, siege towers, and undermining, allowed Assyrians to capture previously impregnable fortresses. Perhaps most importantly, the Assyrians developed a military ideology that justified extreme brutality as divinely sanctioned terror. Tiglath-Pileser I, who ruled from 1114 to 1076 BCE, exemplified the new Assyrian warrior king. Leading annual campaigns that pushed Assyrian power to the Mediterranean, his annals describe in loving detail the destruction of enemy cities, the deportation of populations, and the collection of tribute. Yet he was also a scholar who collected texts for the royal library and commissioned learned works on grammar and lexicography. The Assyrian royal ideology developed during this period presented the king as the earthly representative of Asher, the national god, whose divine mission was to extend Asher's domain over the entire world. Enemies were not merely political opponents, but cosmic forces of chaos that threatened divine order. Their destruction was therefore not just permitted, but required as a religious duty. This theological justification for empire found its ultimate expression in the Neo-Assyrian period, beginning in 911 BCE. Under rulers like Ashur-Nasirpal II and Shalmaneser III, Assyrian armies became annual facts of life for neighboring peoples, as regular as the harvest, but far more terrible. Relief sculptures from Assyrian palaces depict in gruesome detail the fate of those who resisted: impalement, flaying alive, and mass deportation. Yet the Assyrian Empire was more than just a military machine. The great capitals at Assur, Nimrud, and Nineveh became centers of learning and culture. Assyrian kings, especially Ashurbanipal, amassed libraries containing thousands of texts, preserving the literary heritage of Mesopotamia for posterity. Assyrian artists created palace reliefs of extraordinary power and beauty, depicting not just warfare, but also royal hunts, religious ceremonies, and mythological scenes. The Assyrian administrative system, building on earlier Mesopotamian models, achieved unprecedented efficiency in governing diverse populations. Provincial governors reported directly to the king through a sophisticated communication network using royal roads and relay stations. Mass deportations, while brutal, served to break up potential resistance and create mixed populations dependent on Assyrian rule for stability. As you sink into deeper relaxation, picture these ancient empire builders, driven by visions of universal rule, yet ultimately undone by the very forces they sought to control. The Assyrian Empire at its height controlled more territory than any previous Mesopotamian state. Yet it also faced greater challenges in maintaining unity across such vast distances and diverse populations. Babylon, though reduced to provincial status under Assyrian rule, remained a cultural and religious center that no conqueror could ignore. Even Assyrian kings who destroyed Babylon's political independence felt compelled to seek legitimation through traditional Babylonian ceremonies. The ancient city's prestige was such that destroying it, as Sennacherib did in 689 BCE, was seen as sacrilege that brought divine punishment. The reconstruction of Babylon by Esarhaddon and its further glorification by Ashurbanipal demonstrated the enduring power of Babylonian culture. Even the mightiest Assyrian rulers portrayed themselves as protectors of Babylon's temples and patrons of its scholars. This cultural prestige would ultimately outlast Assyrian military might. The 7th century BCE marked both the apex and the beginning of the end for Assyrian power. Under Esarhaddon, the empire reached its greatest extent, conquering Egypt and making even distant kingdoms like Lydia and Urartu tributary states. Yet the costs of maintaining such an empire in blood, treasure, and administrative complexity grew ever higher. Rebellions became endemic as subject peoples seized any opportunity to throw off the Assyrian yoke. Egypt regained independence. Babylonia revolted repeatedly. New peoples like the Medes and Scythians pressed against the empire's borders. The Assyrian military machine, though still formidable, found itself stretched thin, responding to crises on multiple fronts. The reign of Ashurbanipal, beginning in 668 BCE, represented both the cultural zenith and the political beginning of the end for Assyria. His library at Nineveh, containing over 30,000 tablets, preserved virtually the entire corpus of Mesopotamian literature. He commissioned new editions of ancient texts, supported scholarly research, and created the world's first systematically organized library. Yet Ashurbanipal's reign also saw devastating civil war, when his brother, whom he had installed as king of Babylon, revolted. The subsequent conflict, lasting years and consuming enormous resources, weakened both Assyria and Babylonia. Though Ashurbanipal ultimately triumphed, the empire never fully recovered from this self-inflicted wound. Environmental factors may have compounded Assyria's political problems. Evidence suggests climate change brought decreased rainfall to the region, affecting agricultural productivity. Deforestation, caused by centuries of intensive exploitation for building projects and fuel, led to erosion and further agricultural decline. The very success of Assyrian imperialism may have contributed to ecological degradation that undermined its economic base. As you continue your journey toward restful sleep, consider how the Assyrian experience demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of ancient imperialism. Through superior organization, technology, and ruthlessness, the Assyrians created the largest empire the world had yet seen. They developed administrative techniques that would influence all subsequent empires. They preserved and transmitted the cultural heritage of ancient Mesopotamia. Yet their reliance on force and terror ultimately proved self-defeating. The brutality that cowed enemies, also created undying hatred. The deportations that broke up resistance also disrupted productive communities. The tribute that enriched the imperial centers impoverished the provinces. The very mechanisms of control became sources of weakness when imperial power wavered. The Assyrian Empire's sudden collapse demonstrated how even the mightiest powers could fall with stunning rapidity. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians under Nabopolassar and Medes under Cyaxares besieged Nineveh. The city that had been the terror of the ancient world fell after only 3 months. Its destruction was so complete that later Greek historians passing through the area could scarcely believe such a place had ever existed. The fall of Nineveh sent shockwaves through the ancient world. Prophets in Judah celebrated the destruction of their oppressor. Subject peoples everywhere threw off Assyrian control. Within a few years, the empire that had dominated the Near East for centuries had vanished, leaving only ruins and bitter memories. Yet from these ashes would rise the last great Mesopotamian empire as Babylon experienced a final golden age under the Chaldean dynasty. The Neo-Babylonian Empire would create wonders that amaze the ancient world while preserving and culminating the cultural traditions of 3 millennia. As your consciousness drifts toward dreams, let the dramatic rise and fall of empires remind you of the eternal rhythms of history, where power rises and falls like the flooding rivers, but the waters of civilization flow on, carrying their precious cargo of human achievement toward unknown shores. The final century of independent Mesopotamian civilization began with the spectacular fall of the Assyrian Empire, demonstrating how even the mightiest powers could collapse with stunning rapidity. In 612 BCE, when the coalition of Babylonians and Medes destroyed Nineveh, the city that had terrorized the ancient world for centuries vanished almost overnight. From the ashes of Assyrian power arose the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the last great Mesopotamian state. Under Nabopolassar, a Chaldean leader who had spearheaded the revolt against Assyria, and his son Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon experienced a final golden age that would make it the wonder of the ancient world. This renaissance represented not mere nostalgia, but a creative synthesis of Mesopotamian traditions adapted to new circumstances. Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled from 605 to 562 BCE, transformed Babylon into the greatest city the world had yet seen. Its walls, stretching over 18 kilometers, enclosed an area of 975 hectares, large enough to farm during sieges. The Ishtar Gate, decorated with glazed brick reliefs of dragons and bulls, led to a processional way lined with lions that conducted visitors to the city's heart, where the great ziggurat Etemenanki rose 7 stages toward heaven. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, if they existed as ancient sources claim, represented the pinnacle of Mesopotamian engineering prowess. According to tradition, Nebuchadnezzar built these terraced gardens for his Median wife, who missed the mountains of her homeland. Recent archaeological theories suggest they may have actually been in Nineveh, but the legend speaks to Babylon's reputation for achieving the impossible through human ingenuity. This architectural grandeur served political and religious purposes. Nebuchadnezzar presented himself as the heir to all Mesopotamian history, commissioning inscriptions in archaic Sumerian, rebuilding ancient temples, and reviving long-dormant rituals. The New Year festival, when the king's power was symbolically renewed, became an elaborate spectacle lasting 12 days, involving the entire population in celebrations that reinforced cosmic and political order. The Neo-Babylonian Empire extended from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, incorporating the ancient territories of Sumer, Akkad, and Assyria into a unified state. Babylonian armies campaigned in the Levant, destroying Jerusalem in 586 BCE, and carrying the Judean elite into the Babylonian captivity that would profoundly influence Jewish religion and, through it, Christianity and Islam. Yet this empire, built as much on cultural prestige as military might, faced new challenges from beyond Mesopotamia's traditional horizons. To the east, the Persians and Medes were creating new forms of imperial organization that would soon eclipse Mesopotamian models. To the west, Greek merchants and mercenaries brought new ideas that would challenge ancient certainties. Babylonian scholars during this period produced works of remarkable sophistication. Astronomical texts achieved unprecedented precision in predicting celestial phenomena, laying groundwork for later Greek and Islamic astronomy. Mathematical tablets solved complex problems using algebraic techniques that would not be rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. Medical texts combined empirical observation with theoretical frameworks that influenced healing practices throughout the ancient world. The last native king of Babylon, Nabonidus, proved to be one of the most enigmatic figures in Mesopotamian history. An antiquarian and mystic, he spent years excavating ancient temples and reviving forgotten cults. His devotion to the moon god Sin over Marduk alienated the Babylonian priesthood, while his decade-long sojourn in the Arabian desert left the empire in the hands of his son Belshazzar. As you continue drifting toward peaceful slumber, consider how this final phase of Mesopotamian independence represented both culmination and transformation. Everything that made Mesopotamian civilization distinctive, its urban life, its literary traditions, its religious practices, its administrative techniques, reached full maturity, yet the world was changing in ways that would make these achievements obsolete. When Cyrus the Great of Persia approached Babylon in 539 BCE, he encountered a civilization that had endured for over 3 millennia, yet was exhausted by its own weight. The Babylonian chronicles record that he entered the city without battle, welcomed as a liberator by a population tired of Nabonidus's eccentricities. Cyrus shrewdly presented himself as chosen by Marduk to restore proper worship and just rule. The Persian conquest marked the end of Mesopotamian political independence, but not of Mesopotamian culture. Under Persian Achaemenid, Seleucid, Parthian, and Sasanian rule, Babylonian scholars continued their work. Temples maintained their rituals, and cuneiform writing persisted for scientific and religious purposes until the 1st century of the Common Era. This remarkable continuity speaks to the deep roots of Mesopotamian civilization and its ability to adapt to changing circumstances. What had begun as scattered villages along 2 rivers had evolved into a cultural complex that could survive the loss of political independence by embedding itself in the broader traditions of Near Eastern and eventually world civilization. The Persian period saw important adaptations in Mesopotamian culture. While political power now resided in Persepolis and Susa, Babylon remained a major administrative center and occasional royal residence. The Persians, unlike the Assyrians, ruled through existing local institutions, allowing considerable cultural autonomy. Babylonian astronomers and scholars found patronage at the Persian court, where their expertise was valued and their traditions respected. Religious life continued with remarkable continuity. The great temples still functioned, though with reduced resources. The Akitu New Year festival was still celebrated. Priests still performed the daily rituals that maintained cosmic order. Yet subtle changes occurred. Mesopotamian deities were increasingly identified with Persian gods. Zoroastrian concepts of cosmic dualism influenced Babylonian theology. The ancient polytheism began to give way to more abstract theological speculation. Economic life also adapted to new conditions. Babylon remained a commercial hub, but now as part of a vast empire stretching from India to Egypt. New trade opportunities opened as Persian roads and administrative efficiency reduced transaction costs. Babylonian merchants ventured further than ever before, establishing contacts throughout the Persian Empire and beyond. The famous Murashu archive from Nippur illustrates these adaptations. This Babylonian business family managed agricultural estates, provided credit, and facilitated trade across ethnic and religious boundaries. Their documents, written in cuneiform but reflecting Persian administrative practices, show how Mesopotamian traditions evolved to meet new circumstances. Cultural exchange intensified during this period. Babylonian astronomical knowledge spread throughout the Persian Empire, influencing Indian and eventually Greek science. Mesopotamian literary traditions found new audiences as Aramaic became the lingua franca of the Persian Empire. The Epic of Gilgamesh was translated and adapted, spreading its themes throughout the ancient world. Yet this was also a period of gradual decline for traditional Mesopotamian culture. Cuneiform literacy became increasingly restricted to temple scholars and astronomers. Akkadian gave way to Aramaic in daily use. Young people increasingly looked to Persian and later Greek models rather than ancient Mesopotamian traditions. As sleep approaches, reflect on how civilizations adapt and transform rather than simply dying. The Neo-Babylonian Empire's brief florescence represented not a last gasp, but a transformation, as ancient traditions found new expressions in a changing world. The scholars who watched Cyrus enter Babylon could not have imagined that their intellectual descendants would still be practicing astronomy and mathematics in the same city 6 centuries later, writing in cuneiform even as Alexander's successors ruled from Macedonian palaces. In your dreams tonight, walk through Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon at its height, seeing the glazed bricks shine in the setting sun, hearing the multitude of languages in its streets, feeling the weight of 3,000 years of history in its ancient stones. Then watch as time transforms, but does not destroy, as new peoples bring new ways, as the eternal rivers flow on, carrying the wisdom of ages toward futures undreamed. For this is the lesson of Mesopotamia's final phase, that human achievement transcends political power, that culture outlives empires, that what we create in the realm of mind and spirit survives long after our monuments crumble back to clay. Under Persian rule, Mesopotamia entered a new phase of its existence, no longer the center of empire, but a wealthy province in a vast multinational state that stretched from India to Egypt. The Achaemenid Persians wisely chose to rule through existing institutions, maintaining Babylon as a major administrative center and respecting local traditions while extracting tribute and military service for their far-flung campaigns. This period saw Mesopotamia increasingly divided, not politically but culturally, linguistically, and economically. The ancient unity of the land between the rivers gave way to regional variations as different areas developed distinct identities within the Persian imperial system. Northern Mesopotamia, centered on the old Assyrian heartland, became more closely tied to the Iranian plateau, while the south maintained stronger connections to the Aramaic-speaking west. Aramaic, originally the language of nomadic peoples, had gradually become the lingua franca of the Persian Empire, displacing Akkadian in daily use. Though cuneiform continued for scholarly and religious purposes, most people now spoke Aramaic, wrote on papyrus or leather when they wrote at all, and participated in an international culture that blended Mesopotamian, Persian, and Western influences. The great cities of antiquity experienced different fates under foreign rule. Babylon remained prosperous, serving as a winter capital for Persian kings and maintaining its position as a commercial hub. Its temples continued to function, its astronomers made new discoveries, and its merchants traded throughout the known world. Yet, it was no longer creating new traditions, but preserving old ones, increasingly looking backward to a glorious past rather than forward to an uncertain future. Other ancient centers were less fortunate. Uruk, Ur, and Nippur declined into provincial towns, their great temples crumbling, their populations dwindling as trade routes shifted and irrigation systems deteriorated without constant maintenance. The cumulative effects of millennia of irrigation had left much of southern Mesopotamia salinized and less productive, forcing populations to migrate northward or to the cities. Yet this period also saw remarkable intellectual achievements as Mesopotamian learning spread throughout the ancient world. Babylonian astronomers, working within Greek philosophical frameworks, created mathematical models of planetary motion that would remain unsurpassed until the time of Kepler. Their precise observations and calculations laid the foundation for both astrology and astronomy as practiced in the Hellenistic and Islamic worlds. Berossus, a Babylonian priest writing in Greek around 280 BCE, composed a history of Babylonia that transmitted Mesopotamian traditions to the Hellenistic world. Though his work survives only in fragments, it influenced Greek and Roman understanding of ancient history and preserved Mesopotamian creation myths and king lists that would otherwise have been lost. As you settle deeper into restful contemplation, imagine this twilight period of Mesopotamian civilization like an aged scholar passing on wisdom to eager students. The culture that had invented writing, law, urban life, and so much else now found its role as teacher and inspiration to younger civilizations that would carry forward its legacy in new forms. The arrival of Alexander the Great in 331 BCE seemed to promise a revival of Babylon's fortunes. The young conqueror was fascinated by the ancient city, planning to make it his eastern capital and launching ambitious restoration projects. He ordered the rebuilding of Etemenanke and other temples, consulted with Chaldean astronomers, and participated in Babylonian rituals that acknowledged him as legitimate king. Alexander's early death in Babylon in 323 BCE ended these dreams of restoration. The wars of his successors devastated Mesopotamia as competing armies marched back and forth across the land. Eventually, the Seleucid dynasty established control, building a new capital at Seleucia on the Tigris that drew population and resources away from the ancient cities. Under Seleucid rule, Mesopotamia became increasingly Hellenized. Greek colonists established new cities. Greek became the language of administration. Greek cultural institutions like gymnasiums and theaters appeared alongside ancient temples. This cultural fusion created new synthetic traditions, blending Mesopotamian and Greek elements in art, religion, and thought. The Parthians, who conquered Mesopotamia in 141 BCE, brought yet another layer of cultural influence. These Iranian nomads turned empire builders maintained a looser form of control, allowing considerable local autonomy. Mesopotamia became a contested borderland between the Parthian and later Sasanian empires in the east and the Roman Empire in the west, suffering periodic devastation as armies clashed over this wealthy region. Despite political upheavals, certain aspects of Mesopotamian culture showed remarkable persistence. Cuneiform writing, though increasingly rare, continued to be used for astronomical texts until at least 75 CE. The last known cuneiform tablet, an astronomical almanac, demonstrates the extraordinary conservatism of Mesopotamian scholarship, maintaining traditions that stretched back over 3,000 years. Temples continued to function, though with diminished resources and authority. The great Akitu New Year festival was still celebrated in Babylon during the Parthian period, though the kingship it renewed was now foreign, and the cosmic order it maintained seemed increasingly precarious in a changing world. As you drift deeper into sleep's embrace, consider how this long twilight of Mesopotamian civilization was not a simple decline, but a complex transformation. Different aspects of the culture evolved at different rates. While political independence was lost, intellectual traditions continued. While some cities declined, others adapted and thrived. While ancient languages faded, ancient wisdom found new expressions. The division of Mesopotamia during this period was not just geographical, but temporal. In the same city, at the same time, some inhabitants lived fully in the Hellenistic or Parthian present, while others maintained ancient traditions stretching back millennia. A Greek gymnasium might stand next to a Babylonian temple. A merchant might use Greek for business, Aramaic for daily life, and here Akkadian in religious ceremonies. This cultural layering created a uniquely complex society. The astronomical diary tablets from Babylon record not just celestial observations, but historical events, commodity prices, and river levels, continuing a tradition of systematic observation that began in the 7th century BCE. These scholars maintained their work through political upheavals, invasions, and social transformations, demonstrating remarkable cultural resilience. Religious life during this period showed both continuity and change. The old gods still received worship, but increasingly syncretic forms emerged. Babylonian deities were identified with Greek and Iranian gods. Mystery cults promised personal salvation in ways traditional Mesopotamian religion had not. Astrological beliefs, originally developed for state purposes, became increasingly personalized, offering individuals insight into their destinies. The story of Mesopotamia's division and divergence offers profound lessons about cultural persistence and transformation. As your mind drifts toward dreams, reflect on how civilizations rarely simply end, but rather transform, divide, and merge with new influences. The astronomers who made the last cuneiform observations were heirs to a tradition stretching back to the first scribes of Uruk, yet they lived in a world those ancient pioneers could never have imagined. Tomorrow's waking world carries within it countless transformations of ancient wisdom, divisions and divergences that created new syntheses. In your dreams tonight, perhaps you will wander through Seleucid Babylon, where Greek philosophers debate in the shadow of ziggurats, where Parthian nobles consult Chaldean astrologers, where Jewish exiles preserve their own traditions while absorbing Mesopotamian wisdom. All rivers eventually reach the sea, but they may divide into many channels, each carrying the same waters by different paths toward their destination. The first centuries of the Common Era witnessed the final transformation of Mesopotamian civilization from a living culture into a historical memory. As new religions, political systems, and languages completed the slow process of change that had begun with the Persian conquest, what emerged was not death, but metamorphosis, as Mesopotamian elements were absorbed into the broader currents of Near Eastern and world civilization. Christianity arrived early in Mesopotamia, with tradition claiming that the Apostle Thomas preached in Babylon and established churches throughout the region. By the 2nd century CE, Christian communities flourished in the ancient cities, building churches sometimes on the foundations of pagan temples and translating scriptures into Syriac, a dialect of Aramaic that became the liturgical language of Eastern Christianity. The old gods did not surrender without struggle. Pagan traditions persisted, especially in northern Mesopotamia, where the ancient city of Harran remained a center of moon worship and Hermetic philosophy until the Islamic conquest. Mesopotamian astrology, thoroughly Hellenized and philosophized, spread throughout the Roman Empire, influencing everyone from emperors to peasants who sought guidance from Chaldean astrologers. Manichaeism, founded by the Babylonian prophet Mani in the 3rd century CE, represented perhaps the last creative religious synthesis to emerge from Mesopotamian soil. Combining elements of Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism with ancient Mesopotamian dualistic traditions, this religion spread from China to North Africa before persecution eventually extinguished it. The Sasanian Persians, who overthrew the Parthians in 224 CE, brought renewed imperial energy to Mesopotamia. establishing Ctesiphon on the Tigris as their winter capital and launching ambitious irrigation projects that temporarily revived agricultural productivity. They also brought a more militant form of Zoroastrianism that viewed the old Mesopotamian gods as demons to be suppressed rather than traditions to be preserved. Yet, even under Sasanian rule, Mesopotamian learning continued to influence the wider world. The great medical school at Jundishapur, originally founded by Sasanian kings, became a center where Greek, Indian, and Mesopotamian medical traditions merged, creating new syntheses that would later influence Islamic medicine. Babylonian astronomical techniques and observations remained essential for calendar calculations and astrological predictions. As you drift toward the shores of sleep, consider how this gradual transformation mirrors the natural cycles that Mesopotamians had always observed. Just as the annual flood renewed the land by depositing fresh soil, so the flood of new peoples and ideas renewed human civilization by building upon ancient foundations. Nothing was truly lost, only transformed into new configurations. The Islamic conquest of Mesopotamia between 633 and 637 CE marked the definitive end of ancient Mesopotamian culture, yet it also marked a new beginning. As the region became part of the expanding Islamic world, Baghdad, founded in 762 CE just north of ancient Babylon, became the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate and one of the world's greatest cities, consciously inheriting the mantle of Mesopotamian urban civilization. Islamic scholars preserved and transmitted Mesopotamian knowledge, translating works on astronomy, mathematics, and medicine from Persian and Syriac into Arabic. The Babylonian sexagesimal system, the division of the circle into 360 degrees, the names of stars and constellations, all passed through Islamic culture into the modern world. The very word algebra derives from Arabic translations of Babylonian mathematical concepts. Archaeological rediscovery of ancient Mesopotamia began in the 19th century, as European travelers and scholars began excavating the great tells that dotted the landscape. The decipherment of cuneiform in the 1850s opened up thousands of years of recorded history that had been lost to human memory, revealing the full magnitude of Mesopotamian achievements and their influence on world civilization. What emerged from the dust was not just broken pottery and crumbling tablets, but the recognition that Mesopotamia had been the laboratory where humanity first experimented with the fundamental technologies of civilization. Cities, writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, and countless other innovations first developed between the Tigris and Euphrates became the common heritage of all humanity. Modern Iraq, the inheritor of this ancient landscape, continues to grapple with the legacy of being civilization's birthplace. The great museums of Baghdad and Mosul house treasures that connect contemporary Iraqis to their incomparable heritage, while archaeological sites like Babylon and Ur attract visitors seeking to understand humanity's earliest achievements. The tragedy of recent wars has damaged this heritage, with looting and destruction threatening sites and artifacts that survived millennia. Yet the resilience that allowed Mesopotamian culture to persist through so many conquests and transformations continues as Iraqi scholars and international teams work to preserve and understand this foundational civilization. As you sink deeper into restorative sleep, let your mind rest on the extraordinary journey we have traced together, from the first farmers who drained the marshes to the last astronomers who recorded celestial movements in cuneiform. Mesopotamian civilization demonstrated humanity's capacity to create meaning and order in an uncertain world. The ancient Mesopotamians believed that nothing was ever truly created or destroyed, only transformed from one state to another. In this, they proved prophetic about their own civilization, which never truly died but continues to live on in transformed state in our laws and languages, our cities and calendars, our literature and learning. Consider how the challenges they faced remain our challenges. How do we organize diverse peoples into peaceful communities? How do we balance human needs with environmental sustainability? How do we preserve wisdom while adapting to change? How do we create meaning in the face of mortality? Their answers may not be our answers, but their questions remain profoundly relevant. The story of Mesopotamian decline and transformation reminds us that endings are also beginnings, that what appears to be death may be metamorphosis, that human achievements in the realm of mind and spirit outlast the rise and fall of empires. The last cuneiform tablet was written, but the mathematical concepts it recorded remain eternal. The last ziggurat crumbled, but the human aspiration to reach toward heaven endures. In your dreams tonight, perhaps you will witness this great transformation, seeing ancient temples become churches and mosques, watching cuneiform evolve into alphabets, observing Sumerian farmers become Islamic scholars, all part of the endless river of human culture flowing from past to future. For we are all heirs of Mesopotamia, all participants in the great experiment in civilization that began between the rivers so long ago. Rest now in the knowledge that what they began continues in us, that their wisdom illuminates our path, that their failures warn us of pitfalls to avoid. The rivers still flow, the stars still shine, and humanity still strives to create order from chaos, meaning from mystery, just as they did when civilization was young and all was still possible in the land between the waters. As we approach the end of our journey through ancient Mesopotamia's vast history, it is time to consider the profound and lasting impact this earliest civilization has had on our modern world. For in countless ways, both obvious and hidden, we remain the heirs of those first city builders who settled between the rivers, transforming human existence forever. Consider first the gift of writing, humanity's most transformative technology, which emerged from the need to record temple transactions in ancient Uruk. Every time we make a list, send a text, or read a book, we employ the revolutionary principle first discovered by Mesopotamian scribes, that spoken language could be converted into visual symbols capable of preserving thought across time and space. The very concept of law as a written public standard rather than arbitrary royal decree stems from Mesopotamian innovations. When Hammurabi carved his code in stone, he established the principle that justice should be consistent, transparent, and accessible to all citizens who could read or have the laws read to them. This idea that law exists independently of the ruler's whim became foundational to all subsequent legal systems. Our modern cities, with their complex infrastructure, specialized districts, and diverse populations, follow patterns first established in ancient Mesopotamia. The urban problems they faced, managing water supply, organizing labor, maintaining public order, collecting taxes, providing services, remain fundamentally unchanged. Only the technologies we use to address them have evolved. In mathematics and science, Mesopotamian innovations continue to structure our understanding of the world. We divide our hours into 60 minutes and our minutes into 60 seconds because Babylonian mathematicians favored a sexagesimal system. The 360 degrees of a circle, the 12 months of the year, the 7-day week, all preserve Mesopotamian ways of organizing time and space. When astronomers calculate planetary orbits or predict eclipses, they build upon observations first recorded by Babylonian stargazers who patiently tracked celestial movements for centuries. The constellations we recognize, the zodiac we reference, the very idea that heavenly patterns might influence earthly events, all carry forward Mesopotamian concepts, refined over millennia. Literature, too, bears the imprint of Mesopotamian creativity. The Epic of Gilgamesh, with its themes of friendship, mortality, and the search for meaning, established narrative patterns that echo through subsequent literature from Homer to Hollywood. The flood story, preserved in Mesopotamian mythology, influenced religious traditions that today guide billions of believers. As you continue sinking into restful slumber, reflect on how Mesopotamian innovations in agriculture still feed the world. Irrigation techniques, crop rotation, the domestication of grains and livestock, all originated in the Fertile Crescent between the rivers. Without these advances, human civilization as we know it could never have developed. The concept of empire, of diverse peoples united under a single political authority, was pioneered by Sargon of Akkad and refined by subsequent Mesopotamian rulers. Their experiments in managing linguistic, religious, and ethnic diversity, their successes and failures, continue to offer lessons for our own increasingly interconnected yet diverse world. In the realm of commerce, Mesopotamians created many tools we still use: credit and debt, interest and investment, contracts and receipts, partnerships and corporations. The first merchants who sealed their transactions with cylinder seals were pioneers of international trade whose successors continue to connect distant markets today. Architectural principles developed in Mesopotamia persist in modern construction. The arch and vault, the dome and tower, all evolved from Mesopotamian experiments with mud, brick, and stone. When architects design buildings to impress and inspire, they follow impulses first expressed in ancient ziggurats reaching toward heaven. Even our religious consciousness bears Mesopotamian influence. The idea of a cosmic struggle between order and chaos, the concept of divine law governing human behavior, the practice of communal worship in dedicated sacred spaces, all emerged first in Mesopotamian temples. Western religions inherited these concepts through complex paths of cultural transmission. Beyond specific innovations, Mesopotamia bequeathed to humanity a crucial lesson about civilization itself, that human beings could, through cooperation and ingenuity, transcend the limitations of nature and create something greater than the sum of individual efforts. This confidence in collective human capability remains essential to addressing modern challenges. As your consciousness drifts toward dreams, consider how the legacy of Mesopotamia lives, not in any single nation or culture, but as the common heritage of all humanity. Dispersed through countless channels of cultural transmission, Mesopotamian innovations became so fundamental to human civilization that we no longer recognize their origin. When students learn algebra, they unknowingly master techniques developed by Babylonian scribes. When farmers irrigate their fields, they employ principles discovered in ancient Sumer. When judges apply written law, they follow precedents established by Mesopotamian kings. When astronomers calculate celestial mechanics, they build upon Babylonian observations. This dispersed legacy means that Mesopotamian civilization achieved a different kind of immortality than its kings sought. Not preserved in stone monuments or golden treasures, but woven into the very fabric of human culture, so thoroughly integrated that it became invisible yet essential, like the foundation of a building that supports all above it, though hidden from view. Museums around the world preserve Mesopotamian artifacts, allowing modern visitors to connect with this ancient culture through objects of daily life and monumental art. Yet the true museum of Mesopotamian achievement is civilization itself. Every city, every library, every court of law, every observatory carries forward the experiments begun between the Tigris and Euphrates. In our digital age, we might think ourselves far removed from ancient clay tablets. Yet our information revolution merely continues the trajectory begun by those first scribes who discovered that knowledge could be externalized from human memory, stored, retrieved, and transmitted across generations. We are still exploring the implications of that first breakthrough. As global citizens grapple with governing diverse populations, managing natural resources, and maintaining peace between nations, we face challenges remarkably similar to those confronted by Mesopotamian rulers. Their solutions and failures provide valuable precedents for our own efforts to create just and sustainable societies. Environmental lessons from Mesopotamia prove particularly relevant today. The salinization that eventually crippled Mesopotamian agriculture warns us about the importance of sustainable practices. The deforestation that contributed to erosion reminds us that short-term exploitation can have long-term consequences. Their experience demonstrates that civilizations must balance present needs with future sustainability. The story of Mesopotamia also teaches us about resilience and adaptation. And now, as our long journey through the history of ancient Mesopotamia draws to its close, let your mind rest upon the eternal truths revealed by this first great experiment in human civilization. Like the rivers that gave it birth, flowing steadily toward the sea, carrying rich sediments of wisdom and memory that nourish all they touch. As you drift deeper into peaceful slumber, imagine yourself standing atop an ancient ziggurat at sunset, gazing out over the land between the rivers. The sun sets, as it has for countless millennia, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple that the ancients saw as divine messages. The same light that illuminated the first cities now bathes the ruins where archaeologists patiently uncover the past. Below you, the Tigris and Euphrates continue their eternal journey, carrying the same waters that sustained the first farmers, nourished the first cities, and reflected the first laws carved in stone. These rivers have witnessed the entire human story from its earliest chapters and continue flowing, carrying their memories toward tomorrow. In the gathering twilight, you can almost see the ghosts of the past. Sumerian farmers tending their irrigation channels, Akkadian warriors marching to extend their empire, Babylonian astronomers calculating the movements of planets, Assyrian scribes recording the deeds of kings, all part of the great human story that began in this blessed and cursed land. Let your breathing slow and deepen like the rhythm of the rivers that pulse through Mesopotamian history, sometimes flooding with creative energy, sometimes running low during periods of crisis, but always continuing, always renewing, always connecting the mountains where they begin to the sea where they end, just as Mesopotamian culture connected humanity's beginning to its future. As sleep approaches, consider how every night's rest mirrors the cycle of civilizations, a daily death and rebirth that renews our strength for tomorrow's challenges. The Mesopotamians understood this cycle, building it into their myths, their rituals, their very understanding of existence. Nothing is permanent, yet nothing is truly lost, only transformed into new shapes and possibilities. The stars emerging in the darkening sky are the same stars the Babylonians charted, mapping the heavens with patient observation and mathematical precision. When you see Venus rising, remember that Mesopotamian astronomers called it Ishtar and calculated its movements with astonishing accuracy. Their observations laid the groundwork for our modern understanding of the cosmos. Through conquests and catastrophes, floods and droughts, the essential elements of Mesopotamian culture persisted by transforming and adapting to new circumstances. This flexibility in the face of change offers hope for our own rapidly evolving world. Rest now in the knowledge that you are connected across millennia to those ancient innovators who first dared to redirect rivers, build cities, and reach toward heaven. Their dreams became our reality. Their experiments became our foundations. Their wisdom became our inheritance. In every aspect of civilized life, we build upon what they began, adding our own contributions to the great river of human culture that flows from past to future. Tomorrow, when you wake, you will walk in a world shaped by Mesopotamian innovations, speak languages influenced by their expressions, think thoughts structured by their categories. For we are all Mesopotamians in the deepest sense, heirs to the first great experiment in transcending the limitations of nature through human cooperation and creativity. And now, as our long journey through the history of ancient Mesopotamia draws to its close, let your mind rest upon the eternal truths revealed by this first great experiment in human civilization. Like the rivers that gave it birth, flowing steadily toward the sea, carrying rich sediments of wisdom and memory that nourish all they touch. As you drift deeper into peaceful slumber, imagine yourself standing atop an ancient ziggurat at sunset, gazing out over the land between the rivers. The sun sets as it has for countless millennia, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple that the ancients saw as divine messages. The same light that illuminated the first cities now bathes the ruins where archaeologists patiently uncover the past. Below you, the Tigris and Euphrates continue their eternal journey, carrying the same waters that sustained the first farmers, nourished the first cities, and reflected the first laws carved in stone. These rivers have witnessed the entire human story from its earliest chapters and continue flowing, carrying their memories toward tomorrow. In the gathering twilight, you can almost see the ghosts of the past. Sumerian farmers tending their irrigation channels, Akkadian warriors marching to extend their empire, Babylonian astronomers calculating the movements of planets, Assyrian scribes recording the deeds of kings, all part of the great human story that began in this blessed and cursed land. Let your breathing slow and deepen, like the rhythm of the rivers that pulse through Mesopotamian history, sometimes flooding with creative energy, sometimes running low during periods of crisis, but always continuing, always renewing, always connecting the mountains where they begin to the sea where they end, just as Mesopotamian culture connected humanity's beginning to its future. As sleep approaches, consider how every night's rest mirrors the cycle of civilizations, a daily death and rebirth that renews our strength for tomorrow's challenges. The Mesopotamians understood this cycle, building it into their myths, their rituals, their very understanding of existence. Nothing is permanent, yet nothing is truly lost, only transformed into new shapes and possibilities. The stars emerging in the darkening sky are the same stars the Babylonians charted, mapping the heavens with patient observation and mathematical precision. When you see Venus rising, remember that Mesopotamian astronomers called it Ishtar and calculated its movements with astonishing accuracy. Their observations laid the groundwork for our modern understanding of the cosmos. In the soft darkness that embraces ancient tells and modern cities alike, rest the accumulated memories of 5,000 years of human striving. Each layer of earth contains fragments of lives lived, hopes pursued, dreams realized and lost. Yet from this accumulation of individual experiences arose something greater, a civilization that transformed human possibility forever. As your eyelids grow heavy, like the ancient gates of Babylon closing for the night, remember that you carry within you the legacy of those first city builders. Every time you read or write, use numbers or laws, live in cities or gaze at stars, you participate in traditions they began. Your life connects to theirs across the vast river of time. The ancient Mesopotamians believed that sleep was a journey to another realm, where messages from gods and glimpses of the future might be revealed. In this tradition, let your dreams tonight carry you back to those first cities rising from the alluvial plain, monuments to human ambition and creativity that still inspire us today. Rest now, knowing that the story of Mesopotamia is not a tale of distant peoples and dead cultures, but the first chapter of our own story as human beings seeking to create meaning and order in the world. The questions they asked about justice, power, knowledge, and purpose remain our questions. Their achievements and failures, our inheritance. As you cross the threshold into sleep, let the rivers of history carry you gently toward dreams where past and present merge. The same peace that descended over ancient Babylon at nightfall now settles over you, connecting you to the eternal rhythms that govern both nature and civilization. In tomorrow's waking, you will carry forward the legacy of Mesopotamia in ways both conscious and unconscious, adding your own thread to the great tapestry of human culture that began between the rivers. For we are all inheritors of that first great experiment in civilization, all participants in the ongoing story of humanity's journey from scattered bands to global community. Sleep now, cradled by the same forces that cradled civilization itself, the fertile union of human ingenuity and natural abundance, the patient accumulation of knowledge across generations, the irrepressible hope that tomorrow can be better than today. These gifts from ancient Mesopotamia remain with us, eternal as the rivers that gave them birth. May your dreams be filled with the wonders of the ancient world. Ziggurats climbing toward star-filled skies, cuneiform tablets preserving wisdom for eternity, great kings and humble scribes working together to build something larger than themselves. And may you wake refreshed, knowing that you too are part of this magnificent human story that began so long ago between the Tigris and Euphrates. Rest peacefully in the embrace of history's long memory, where every life matters, every contribution counts, and every generation builds upon the last. Just as the ancient Mesopotamians built their cities layer upon layer, reaching always upward toward the heavens while keeping their foundations firmly rooted in the fertile earth that sustains all life. And as the final moments of consciousness fade, remember that endings are only new beginnings in disguise. Just as the fall of each Mesopotamian empire prepared the ground for new growth, so each night's sleep prepares us for new dawns. The cycle continues, eternal and renewing, carrying forward the precious cargo of human achievement from the first cities to whatever wonders await us in the future. Sleep now, inheritor of Mesopotamia, child of the rivers, student of the stars, participant in the great adventure that began when the first farmer planted the first seed in the fertile soil between the waters. Sleep and dream of all that has been and all that yet may be in the eternal story of human civilization. The rivers flow on, the stars shine eternal, and somewhere in the land between the waters, the whisper of ancient voices still carries on the wind, telling us that we are part of something greater than ourselves, something that began in mud and reached for heaven, something that continues in us and through us toward destinies yet undreamed. Rest now. Rest in peace. Rest in the knowledge that the story continues, that the rivers still flow, that the human spirit still reaches upward, just as it did when the world was young and civilization was new in the land of Mesopotamia. Sleep, and let the ancient waters carry you home.